They called her the weakest species in the galaxy until the invasion came, and she led the defense. They laughed when she dropped the grav bar. They laughed harder when it pinned her to the floor, and Mira Thornelber said nothing. She simply waited, silent beneath the weight of polished titanium alloy, eyes locked on the ceiling of the Xenowar Academy Gymnasium as alien students gathered to mock her. A dozen species in dozens of colors, languages, and postures surrounded her in a sneering half-circle of superiority. The Gorlax twins snorted through their plated nostrils. Terran can't even lift a level 2 bar. How did she get admitted? A slender Varkari female hissed. Must have been a diversity grant, or charity. Mira didn't blink. She counted the exits. 1 behind her, 2 to the left. No windows. Structural beams were poorly reinforced on the far wall. If she needed to collapse it, they didn't see it, of course. The threat calculating, mind ticking behind those calm, unreadable eyes, because she looked like a joke. Small for a human. Pale. Short brown hair always tied back. No cybernetic upgrades, no visible implants. She didn't even wear the Academy standard exosuit. Just regulation blacks and the Terran patch stitched at the shoulder, almost like a scar. "Do you require assistance, Cadet Thorne?" asked the Go instructor, a stone-skinned Solkian veteran with deep-set eyes and zero sympathy. "No, sir," she replied calmly, voice flat. She rolled sideways, freeing herself with a grunt, then stood, slowly, deliberately, hands slightly shaking, not from strain, but control. The instructor made a note on his datapad. Final score 3 out of 12, lowest performance in the cadet class. A ripple of smug snickers echoed again. Later that day in tactical theory class, no one remembered what the Hydrian lecturer was saying about subdimensional flanking, but everyone noticed the results on the tactical exam. Mira, 98%. Everyone else, the highest after her was 71, the rest barely cleared 60. "She must have cheated," grunted one of the Orclon brutes, his forearms folded across his chest. "Terrans don't score that high, not on combat strategy." Another muttered, "She probably memorized the answers. Humans are good at copying, right?" The instructor raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Mira sat perfectly still, arms crossed, not bothering to defend herself. She didn't need to. She'd lived through things these kids couldn't imagine. Exams didn't frighten her, neither did insults. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to watch. By week's end, the whispers had turned into theories. Some said she was a Terran spy. Others claimed she was just broken. A war orphan dropped into the academy as a peace gesture. A few believed she was actually some sort of punishment posting, that Earth had sent her here to get rid of her. None were close. Not even a little. What none of them noticed, what no one ever did, was the way she moved before the academy sirens blared. Before anything ever went wrong. Mira always knew. She'd subtly tense her fingers in class minutes before a drill simulation started. She'd brace her boots right before a station-wide gravity shift. She would tilt her head toward a hallway moments before a brawl erupted, like she was predicting chaos. Or maybe she'd lived in it long enough to smell it coming. It wasn't until the day of the combat simulation, what they called the Gauntlet Run, that someone finally saw it. Not just her speed, not just her awareness, but her control. The scenario was meant to be simple. Standard drill, simulated urban warfare, random enemy bot placements, live-action command test. No lethal rounds, no real stakes. But Mira moved like it was real. Clearing rooms alone, silently flanking enemy positions. Using cover, the others missed. Even planting fake explosive markers to draw enemy fire away from other cadets. At the end, she'd cleared the most targets and taken the least hits. Even then, no one clapped. The instructor simply stared at his tablet. That was unexpected. The aliens didn't say anything this time. Their silence wasn't respect. It was discomfort, unease. Because for a moment, the weak little Terran didn't seem so weak. That night in the barracks, a tall insectoid cadet named Kethva crept up behind her. He was the only one who'd fought before, in skirmishes along the Zyrex border. He knew real war, and what he'd seen today wasn't beginner's luck. "You've seen combat," he said quietly, arms folded. Mira didn't turn. She was cleaning her boots with a toothbrush methodically. "You weren't just trained," he added. "You survived something." She finally looked up. Just one sentence. Cold. Dry. "Keep that to yourself." Keithva blinked and walked away. He didn't ask again. The first sign something was wrong wasn't the siren. It was Mira opening her eyes. 3 seconds before it started. She was already upright on her bunk when the klaxon screamed through the dormitory walls, jolting cadets from their sleep. Some scrambled, others shouted. A few cursed in alien tongues, as red emergency lights painted the ceiling like spilled blood. But Mira was calm. Boots laced, gloves on, helmet under her arm. "Kethva," she said without looking. "Helmet." The insectoid cadet was still fumbling with his torso harness. He blinked. "How did you—" "Helmet. Now." They assembled in the training bay, 50 cadets packed into formation under the flickering holoprojectors. Captain Vorquan's voice boomed overhead. Gravel soaked in steel. Unscheduled live sim. Full immersion combat mode. Standard non-lethal protocols engaged. Report to your pods. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Unscheduled? Live? Cadets exchanged glances. No one had received the briefing. No target objectives. No layout files. No AI opponent specs. Mira stood at the far edge of the line. Expression unreadable. Something was off. One by one, the students slid into their neural immersion pods. Mira's eyes traced the wiring overhead. Too many cables rerouted. The power hum was wrong. Sharper. Overclocked. Someone had pushed the limits of the system. As her pod sealed around her and the sync engaged, a voice echoed in her skull. Initiating. Urban conflict environment, Sector Sigma 9. AI pattern. Adaptive aggressor protocol. Wait. Error. The pod stuttered, then surged. Mira didn't panic. She just exhaled once. Slowly. They've loaded live combat AI. She hit the ground running inside the sim, rifle in hand, crouched behind a burnt-out hover truck in a bombed city grid. Smoke curled through shattered neon signs. Screams echoed. In the distance, Kethva's voice crackled in comms. "This isn't a drill." "I know." Explosions ripped through the building 2 blocks over. Shrapnel pinged off the pavement. One of the Frelian cadets was down, limbs flailing as her suit flickered from overload. 2 others tried to pull her out of the line of fire, and got clipped by incoming drone fire. The enemy wasn't just shooting to score, they were shooting to neutralize. This was no simulation. Mira moved like water, flowing between cover, never wasting a bullet. Eyes scanning, always scanning, corners, rooftops, glass reflections. Her mind worked faster than the AI. She knew its logic, not from textbooks but from experience. "Collapse the eastern flank," she ordered. "They're bottlenecking us." "Who the Void put you in command?" barked a snarling Zarnak cadet. "Your commander's unconscious. I'm next. Move, your damn tail." Even the AI paused for 0.7 seconds. While others fumbled to follow tactics they'd only studied in class, Mira executed urban suppression maneuvers used during the siege of Nerix Prime, though none of them knew that. Not yet. She launched a pair of pulse grenades to draw the AI's targeting subroutines, then led her squad up the fire escape of a crumbling tenement and flanked the drone nest above the square. 3 clean shots. All targets down. By the time the rest of the cadets caught up, the enemies were smoldering wreckage. "Where did you learn that?" someone gasped. Mira didn't answer. She was already checking the next sector. "Hey!" Another cadet stormed up. "You could have waited for orders." Mira looked at him, just once. Her words were flat, emotionless. "If I'd waited, you'd be bleeding." The cadet stepped back. After 40 minutes of escalating chaos, glitching weather cycles, and drone logic loops that mimicked actual wartime programming, the sim finally collapsed. A kill switch emergency override was engaged from the control tower. The cadets re-emerged from their pods, sweating, heaving, confused, and rattled. Only Mira stood still. Helmet off, expression calm, eyes sharp. Captain Vorquan stood outside the control booth, face grim. That AI wasn't scheduled. Someone corrupted the scenario matrix. Whispers. Panic. He turned to Mira. And you, Cadet Thorne, moved like someone who's seen real war. Mira didn't flinch. I've read a lot of books, sir. The captain stared at her and said nothing. The medbay lights hummed. Too white. Too clean. But the silence inside was worse. Mira sat alone on the edge of the diagnostic bed, shirt folded beside her, back exposed to the chill air. The room's scanners buzzed quietly, their soft blue light tracing over muscle, bone, and something beneath the skin. Captain Vorquan stood just behind the glass wall, arms crossed. The medical officer beside him wasn't speaking. He didn't have to. The scar was unmistakable. A vertical line, faint but deep, ran from Mira's lower neck to the base of her spine, not the result of trauma but surgery, military grade, the kind of precision incision used only during cybernetic integration. Old implant socket, the medic said finally. Terran war issue. This one was ripped out, not decommissioned. Judging by the scar tissue, it's at least 3 years old. Vorquan narrowed his eyes. She's not supposed to have any augmentations, he muttered. She doesn't, the medic replied. Whatever she had, it's gone. But that scar? That's frontline tech. In the hallway, whispers spread. Like wildfire, they'd seen her disappear after the sim, dragged off for a debriefing. No one knew where she went. But the rumors filled in the blanks. She's a weapon. She's from a ghost unit. No, she's a spy, a human deep plant. She's here to test us. The Zarnak cadet who once shoved her during lunch now avoided eye contact. The Gorlax twins kept their distance. Even Kethva, normally unshakable, had gone quiet. Because now Mira wasn't just strange. She was dangerous. Inside the captain's office, the silence broke. Who are you really, Thorne? Mira looked. I'm a cadet, sir. Don't insult my intelligence, Vorquan tapped the screen on his desk. A hazy document flickered to life. A redacted personnel file. So redacted, in fact, that her name was blacked out. I have clearance for interspecies combat records, he said. And even I can't access this. Mira stared back, calm as ever. You're not supposed to. He leaned forward, voice low. I've fought 5 tours, I know what combat looks like, and I've never seen a cadet drop 3 adaptive drones in 12 seconds flat with 0 backup. So you tell me right now, why are you in my school wearing a first-year uniform with a war scar that doesn't match your age? She looked at the screen, at the redacted lines, then at her own reflection in the black glass, and answered with a whisper. They buried me after Nerix. He froze. The siege of Nerix Prime. A battle so brutal the Galactic Archive marked it classified even in memorials. Thousands dead. Entire cities turned to ash in minutes. The one where a full Terran strike force vanished without record. Vorquan's voice dropped. You were there? She nodded once. I was 16. My unit was pinned during evacuation. Command never got the signal out. So we stayed. For 9 days. He didn't speak, just listened. I was the last one breathing by the time they broke through. I made it to the evac point alone. Someone pulled me into a med pod. Woke up 5 months later, strapped to a breathing tube and declared KIA. Vorquan swallowed. They let the galaxy think you died? She looked down. They needed a clean story. A closed case. No questions about what happened inside the red zone. He sat back slowly, his voice turning to something that resembled respect. So why send you here? Mira glanced toward the wall where the Academy flag hung. Its pristine crest of interstellar unity seemed laughably naive. To see how you train future leaders, she said. To learn what they know about us, about war, and how to survive the next one. By the end of the week, her world had shifted, but so had theirs. The instructors spoke more carefully around her. Cadets moved out of her way in corridors. The ones who once mocked her now whispered in corridors, stealing glances when they thought she wasn't looking. She still ate alone. Still, trained alone, but now, no one laughed. They watched. studied, feared. And in the quiet, as night fell across the vast orbital campus, Mira sat at the edge of her bunk and looked out the reinforced window at the stars. She traced the scar down her spine with one finger. Not in regret, but remembrance, because war had taken everything from her, but it had also left her with something no academy could teach: clarity. It started with a flicker, just one. The lights above the lecture hall dimmed, not completely, not even long enough to raise alarm, but Mira noticed. She always did. Most cadets didn't even blink. The instructor droned on about battlefield chain of command protocols. Mira was already calculating the timing of the lights, the location of the emergency bulkheads, the nearest weapons locker, and then came the second flicker. This one didn't. Stop emergency strobes kicked in. Alarms howled across the academy decks, but they weren't the training drills with the low-frequency buzz. These were war code sirens, real ones, red, piercing, relentless. The walls locked down. Metal shutters slammed over the transparent observation glass. Across the room, armored shutters dropped over the entry points. Students screamed, "What is? Is this another sim? No way, this isn't a drill." Mira didn't move. She already knew. The voice that came through the intercom was flat, robotic, and wrong. Power surge detected. Containment breach in sublevel 3. Unauthorized crafts inbound. Immediate lockdown initiated. Then static, then silence. The Academy's defenses should have engaged, but they didn't. The security bots powered up and immediately short-circuited. Sparks flew from control panels. The holoprojector glitched, showing fragmented images of the Academy's own schematics, crumbling, compromised. Mira stood in the center of the chaos and said one word: pirates. The instructor looked at her. What? They're jamming the network, and they've overridden internal command. He blinked. How would you even... But Mira was already sprinting toward the emergency armory. In the next 90 seconds, everything fell apart. Explosions echoed from the lower decks. Cadets scattered. Some tried to follow evacuation protocols, others froze in place, paralyzed. A few activated their shields, but most didn't know how. They had studied war on paper. Not like this. Not with death walking through the air vents. Mira arrived at the armory just as the override panel shorted out. She grabbed the emergency panel, yanked open the casing, and started rerouting the manual override. Her hands moved fast, practiced, every motion deliberate. Behind her, Kethva appeared, shaking. This is really happening. Grab a pulse rifle, she snapped. Now. But now. The doors behind them blew open. 2 pirates stormed in, tall, jagged armored brutes with black masks and illegal plasma rifles. One aimed toward the panicked cadets huddled behind the supply crates. Mira stepped into their line of fire. No hesitation. One shot from her sidearm dropped the first. She used the recoil to spin into cover, grabbed a broken pipe and hurled it with surgical aim into the second's breathing port. He fell gasping. Dying. Everyone stared. Mira walked over, kicked his weapon away, and checked his comm. Encrypted, but she understood the layout. She looked at the others. There are more. They're coming in waves. They want hostages. Or worse. What do we do? A panicked voice shouted. Mira turned. Her voice was cold steel. We don't scatter. That's what they want. We hold the atrium. Funnel them through one entry. We control angles, control elevation. No one fights solo. But you're not in command, one cadet said weakly. Mira's eyes burned through him. I am now. And, for some reason, no one disagreed. By the 10th minute of the assault, Mira had positioned barricades, deployed improvised shield nets, and coordinated the defense of the Academy's entire third quadrant. Pirates breached the hallways, and were met with organized resistance, not from soldiers, from students, trained and commanded by a girl they once mocked for being weak. Under her orders, the cadets executed hit-and-run flanks. Mira used every lesson from every battlefield she'd bled on. Reversed trap corridors, vertical ambush, angles, decoy pulses. It wasn't perfect. They took losses. The pirates were too many, too trained. But the tide didn't roll over them, because Mira fought like she'd been forged in fire. Because she had. Eventually, Central Command managed to reboot partial system control. Reinforcements arrived, late, bleeding, and stunned to find the pirates already subdued in the upper levels. They found Mira leaning against the wall, armor scorched, one eye bruised, but standing, always standing. A high officer, silver-clad and sharp-eyed, stepped forward. He looked around at the unconscious pirates, then at the cadets, then at Mira. "You led this?" Mira didn't answer. HFY did. She saved us. And for the first time since she arrived at Xenowar Academy, they saluted her. Not out of protocol, not out of fear, out of respect. They rolled out the carpet, not for a ceremony, but for an inquiry. 3 days after the pirate assault, the Galactic Defense Authority arrived. 3 heavy cruisers parked just outside orbital range, their gleaming hulls casting long shadows across the Academy's viewing deck. Officers, judges, war historians, everyone with a badge or a star came down like gravity itself had ordered it. Not to thank her, but to ask one burning question. Who the hell is Mira Thorne? The briefing chamber was cold, formal, and quiet, enough to hear the buzz of the fluorescent panels overhead. Cadets sat in silence along the gallery seats. Instructors were lined behind polished black glass. Even Captain Vorquan had his shoulders squared, spine straight, face neutral, and in the center, standing without armor, without rank, without expression, stood Mira, unflinching, the lead. Tribunal officer stepped forward. Grand Commander Yareth Voss. You didn't earn his presence unless something very serious, or very classified, had occurred. He looked more like a relic than a man. A uniform wrapped around ancient scars. He stared down at Mira, data slate in hand. Cadet Mira Thorne, he said. Or should I say, Lieutenant Commander Mira Thorne of Terran Strike Command. Survivor of Nerix Prime. Decorated with the Flame Insignia, Crimson Eclipse, and the Unrecorded Valor Seal. Gasps rippled across the room. Voss didn't flinch. Why? Did no one here know your real name? Mira's answer was simple. Because they weren't supposed to. Why? Because if they knew, she said calmly, they'd treat me differently. And I needed to see how they train for war without pretending it's a parade. Voss tapped a sequence into his slate. A hologram erupted in the air above, grainy footage pulled from a distant battlefield. It showed Mira, younger, dirtier, arm in a makeshift sling, dragging 2 wounded soldiers through rubble as artillery screamed overhead. It was raw, brutal, real. No one who saw this survived, Voss said. We only recovered it from a downed drone months later. It took 2 years to identify the footage. By then you were already off the grid. He paused, looked directly into her eyes. You were 17. Mira nodded. Why didn't you return to the front after recovery? Mira looked up at the tribunal, voice unwavering. Because I gave everything I had. I died on Nerix, but someone at high command decided I was more valuable if I disappeared. Back in the observation gallery, the cadets sat stunned. The same. Girl who used to eat alone, who couldn't lift the grav bar, who never spoke unless spoken to. She had outranked their instructors. She had bled for a war none of them would ever see. And she never once used it for leverage. HFY couldn't stop staring. The Gorlax twins looked physically ill. Even the Zarnak brute who once challenged her had his hands clenched in shame. Captain Vorquan said nothing, but he saluted as she passed. And for once, it wasn't part of protocol. Later that night, the medal was delivered. No ceremony, no fanfare. Just a small, sealed black case, placed silently on Mira's bunk by a junior officer who didn't say a word. Inside, the medal glinted, a deep red sigil in the shape of a flame engulfing a star. The flame insignia, awarded only posthumously, She picked it up, turned it over in her hand, and didn't smile, because it wasn't victory. It was memory. Word spread across the entire orbital sector within the week. Other academies heard. Galactic news feeds tried to get statements, but Mira refused every interview. She wasn't there to be a legend. She was there to make sure no one else had to be one. Doreen. Cadets now treated her like a ghost in the hallway, not out of fear but out of reverence, as if speaking her name too loudly might invoke the war behind her eyes. She still sat alone, but now they left a seat beside her empty. Every time. No one asked her to stay, but no one asked her to leave either. Mira stood at the edge of the hangar, bay, duffel slung across her shoulder, hair tied in the same simple knot she wore the first day she arrived. Behind her, the academy buzzed like it always had, cadets marching, drills echoing, voices raised in chants. Only now, the laughter had stopped. The stars shimmered just beyond the magnetic field, casting pale light across the flight deck. Small diplomatic shuttle stood waiting, its engines humming gently. It wasn't military issue. It wasn't armored. It was quiet, like her. Departure sequence ready, came the pilot's voice through the comms. She gave a short nod, but didn't step forward. Not yet. Footsteps echoed behind her. Kethva approached, slower than usual, his chitinous hands tucked behind his back in a formal gesture of respect. "You're leaving." "I was never here to stay," she said. He paused beside her, looking out toward the void. "I reviewed your combat layouts," he said. "What you did during the pirate siege. Those tactics were from operations not even in the galactic archives." "They're not taught," Mira replied. "They're endured." Kethva turned to face her, voice low. "We misjudged you." Mira didn't look at him. "You judged what you saw. And now we see clearly." She finally glanced his way. "Just once. That's all I wanted." One by one, others arrived, not as a crowd, not in formation, but as individuals, former bullies, doubters, classmates who now stood quietly at the bay doors, unsure what to say. The Gorlax twins simply nodded. The Zarnak cadet gave a rigid salute. Even Captain Vorquan arrived, hands behind his back, face unreadable. He stepped forward and spoke just loud enough for the others to hear. "You taught them something I never could." She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "That silence," he said, "can be the loudest kind of strength." Mira turned back toward the stars. "I've been called a ghost, a weapon, a legend, but I'm none of those." "Then what are you?" Vorquan asked. She let the silence hang for a breath. "I'm human." With that, she stepped into the shuttle. The doors sealed behind her with a soft hiss. From the outside, the cadets stood watching, reflections caught in the shuttle's hull as it lifted. No fanfare, no speeches, just the quiet thrum of engines as Mira Thorne, once the weakest student in the academy, disappeared into the stars. Inside the shuttle, Mira dropped into her seat and closed her eyes. No war drums, no medals, no headlines, just peace. Finally, the galaxy could whisper, it could wonder, it could rewrite her story 1,000 ways. She didn't need to defend it, because humanity doesn't need to roar, to be feared. They mocked the quiet girl from Earth. Now they leave a chair empty wherever her name is spoken.